Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you for joining us today. Welcome to our very first episode of Preventive Healthcare, according to the Quran and Sunnah series. I'm your host, Hamida Begum, and I'm excited to have this discussion with everyone today. We'll be diving into two essential topics related to our diet and nutrition. And not just any diet, we're going to explore it through the wisdom of the Quran and Sunnah. Joining me today is an incredible guest, Dr. Sarah Hoque. Dr. Hoque is an OBGYN who completed her residency from the University of Chicago Medicine. Now she works at a federally qualified healthcare center where she serves the Spanish and Latina community in Chicago. She has years of experience in helping people of all ages improve their reproductive health and overall well-being. Dr. Hoque, welcome and Jazakallah khair for being here today.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, Hamida. Thank you for inviting me and the opportunity to discuss this very important topic.
Thank you for the introduction. So let's dive into this discussion. I'm sure many of us know this hadith in Sahih al-Bukhari, where Prophet ﷺ said, "There are two blessings which many people waste, health and free time." In this hadith, it teaches us that health is a blessing from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we must take care of it before we lose it. And prevention is the best way to protect this blessing. Let's start with the basics. Dr. Hoque, when we talk about preventive healthcare, what do we mean?
So preventive healthcare refers to the process of identifying diseases or risk factors for diseases early on in the process, so we can take steps to mitigate those risk factors or manage the disease process before they progress to a chronic illness or where they can cause irreparable harm. For example, when we give vaccinations for the flu vaccine or other infectious illnesses, we're trying to prevent the complications that can arise from these infections. When we perform screening tests to identify precancerous lesions or cancer in its early stages, we're hoping to catch it in the early diseases so that it doesn't progress to something more serious. But arguably one of the biggest burdens to our society comes in the form of chronic illnesses. These are illnesses like heart disease, hypertension, diabetes, obesity, cancer, chronic kidney disease, stroke, arthritis, just to name a few. 60% of adults in the United States have at least one chronic disease. And the rates of these illnesses have been rising over the past 20 to 30 years. So what does that tell us? It means there's some factors in our lifestyle that are increasing our risks of developing these illnesses. And the scientific evidence is mounting that in our societies, as we've become more industrialized, the foods that we're eating have become more unhealthy. Our lifestyles have become more sedentary, and we're exposing ourselves to more harmful toxins and chemicals, not just in our diet, but in our personal care and household items. So the good news is that these factors are modifiable. By educating ourselves on what is beneficial and what is harmful, we can make better choices and be proactive in maintaining our health.
That's such an important shift in perspective. In our daily lives, we often wait until we feel pain or discomfort to take action. But Islam actually encourages us to be proactive about our health. And so now that we understand what preventive health is, let's talk about one of the most important aspects, diet and nutrition. Dr. Hoque, what is a diet and how does what we eat impact our long-term health?
So our diet is defined as the foods and drinks that we consume on a regular basis, but it can also refer to how much we eat and when we eat. Our diet is the single most important factor in preventive health. A healthy diet can boost our immune system to fight infections and reduce inflammation. It can help keep our bones and teeth strong. It can help maintain healthy blood pressure and reduce our risks for heart disease and stroke. It can help us maintain a healthy weight. It can help our body to repair from the damages that occur not just with routine wear and tear, but also the effects of many harmful toxins that we unknowingly come to contact with. SubhanAllah, our body is amazing in its ability to repair itself, provided that we give it the proper nutrition and time. And our Islamic tradition enjoins us to eat what is halal and tayyib, and to eat in moderation. And if we truly understood what these injunctions encompass, we could prevent and possibly reverse many of the chronic illnesses that have become so pervasive in our society.
Subhanallah, that is very fascinating. So the wisdom of the Sunnah aligns perfectly with modern health science. And our Prophet ﷺ encouraged eating simple, natural, and wholesome foods. And we know the term halal, but in the Quran, it's often paired with tayyib. Dr. Hoque, can you explain what halal and tayyib mean and why both are important when it comes to our food?
So halal, when we explain it to our kids, it's, what's lawful, what did Allah give us permission to eat, as opposed to haram, what is unlawful. And oftentimes when we're teaching our kids, we'll say, oh, it's halal means it's good, right? And if it's haram, then it's bad for us. But and tayyib, on the other hand, refers to pure or clean, wholesome, okay? So there is a distinction. Everything that is halal may not necessarily be clean and wholesome. Allah gave us leeway in a lot of our, what we're allowed to eat, what we're not allowed to eat, but everything may not be the best for us, especially in the quantities that we're eating. So just because something is halal does not make it tayyib. In modern agricultural, commercial, industrial practices, we've introduced so many harmful chemicals to our food, the way it's processed, that even basic foods like milk or white flour or sugar may contain contaminants that may arguably not meet criteria for tayyib.
That's such an important point. Speaking of what we eat, let's talk about how much we eat. Many of us have heard of the hadith where our Prophet ﷺ said, "The son of Adam does not fill a vessel worse than his stomach. It is sufficient for him to eat a few mouthfuls to keep him going. But if he must fill it, then 1/3 for his food, 1/3 for his drink, and 1/3 for air." Dr. Hoque, can you break this down for us? And what does it actually mean in terms of nutrition?
So I find this hadith really profound, especially, when we take a look at what we're eating, how we're eating. So let's start with the second part, where the Prophet Muhammad is narrated to have said, if he must fill it, then 1/3 for his food, and 1/3 for his drink, and 1/3 for air. So in order to figure out how much is that 1/3, we need to know what is the capacity of the stomach when it's full. And the capacity of the adult stomach is about 1 liter. So that means we should be filling 1/3 of that. So about 330 milliliters with solid foods, 330 milliliters with liquids, and then the rest should be kept empty to allow us to breathe. So 330, I'm going to show you this bottle. This is, I got this on Turkish Airlines. If you take a look at it on the camera, it's 0.33 liters.
Okay.
SubhanAllah. So this is 1/3, right?
Right.
So this is a little bit bigger than the 8-ounce water bottles that you can find in the United States, and halfway between that and the 16-ounce water bottles. So roughly about 12 ounces. So are we really eating 1/3 at a time? So then let's go back to the first part. So even if we're eating the best of quality of foods, if we're eating more than the recommended amount, it's harmful for us. That's why it is one of the worst vessels that we can fill, right? So this is something I think we need to process, and that, when we are raising our children, we have an idea of how much they should be eating, right? Oh, you didn't eat enough, eat some more. And it's a form of love. Like our mothers, make us food and they're like, oh, eat some more, eat some more, right? It's an expression of their love. But we don't recognize that when we are creating these habits where we're routinely eating more than we need, we're actually harming ourselves. We're harming our children in instilling these habits. And not just that, we're not just eating the best quality of foods. Much of what we're eating is unhealthy. And so we're eating excessive amounts of unhealthy food, and that is detrimental to our body being able to heal itself.
Subhanallah, that makes so much sense. So by following these simple guidelines, we can avoid a lot of our health issues, inshallah, especially when it comes to excessive eating. So in today's world, we're constantly, like you said, surrounded by processed foods and large portions. What are some practical ways to apply this hadith in our daily life?
So let's start with the question, why are we eating larger portions? Why are we overeating? The reason why we're eating more than what we should be is that we stop eating when we feel satiated, right? There comes a point where like, okay, our body says we've had enough. We don't need to eat anymore. But there are certain qualities in food that promote satiety. And that's the quantity of fiber and water in the food, right? So the scientific evidence suggests that the more fiber and water content that's in the food, that's what promotes satiety. So when we eat foods with more fiber and water, we feel satiated sooner. Now let's think about what's staple in our diet. White rice, white bread, white pasta, cereals made from refined grains. These foods, what we call refined starches, refined carbohydrates, they've had their fiber removed. So when we're eating them, they're not promoting satiety to the same effect that whole grains or fruits and vegetables would. So if you were to try to eat, for example, brown rice, right? Brown rice is an example of a whole grain as opposed to white rice. I don't know about you, but I can't eat as much brown rice.
Yeah, same. Quinoa, you know?
Yeah, right. So going back to this bottle. So let's say I were to fill this with dates. Mm-hmm. Dates are one of the most fiber-dense foods that we have. I could probably fill 5 to 6 medjool dates in here, right? Yeah. Have you ever tried to eat 5 to 6 medjool dates in one sitting?
No.
It's impossible. Yeah. Why is that? Because it's so high in fiber. Now let's take another food. Apples, carrots, celery sticks. If I were to fill this bottle with any of those, I'd be more than satiated by the time I finish that quantity, right? Mm-hmm. Again, because these are high in soluble fiber and water content. Now, if I were to fill this with white rice, let's say you go to a restaurant and you order biryani. Mm-hmm. If they served you this much biryani, would you be satiated?
I would want more.
Right. So we're eating white rice, we're eating biryani. It's so easy to put down 2-3 times this quantity, right? Mm-hmm. Before we feel satiated. So we need to be mindful that we're eating more foods that have fiber. And by fiber, you know, when you eat foods have fiber, they actually naturally have more nutrients. So being mindful that the foods that we're putting in our body actually help us to feel satiated as opposed. So it's a natural curb on our appetite, you know, so we're not overeating.
Right. And this has been very helpful. And I also think that when we eat mindfully and with gratitude for the food that is in front of us, we naturally tend to eat less and feel more satisfied. So we spoke about quantity. Let's talk about quality of the food we eat. What should we look out for when it comes to ingredients that can be harmful versus those that are beneficial?
In general, the more chemicals that are involved in the food processing, the more potential for harm. This can start with the use of pesticides and herbicides in the farming process, and the use of chemicals in the refining process, like production of canola oil or the seed oils, or in the preserving process, in the canned goods that we find in the grocery stores, or in the use of flavorings and dyes to make our food more palatable. So the first category, let's look at preservatives. Humans have been using various preserving methods for millennia, right? The traditional practices require more time and effort, to naturally preserve these foods. However, to satisfy modern commercial industrial demands, these processes have given way to chemical process. So their food manufacturers are using chemicals to preserve foods for cheaper cost profile and to make it faster, right? And so these include foods like cured meats, sausage, hot dogs, deli meats, bologna, salami, bacon. I don't care if it's halal beef bacon or turkey bacon. These foods are using chemicals like nitrates and nitrites to cure the meat, and these have been linked to carcinogenic processes in our bodies. Take any commercially baked packaged foods. If you grab a loaf of bread off the shelf, look at the commercially baked cookies, crackers, cakes, and read the ingredients. The more chemical names in the ingredients list, the more potential for harm. The second category are the sweeteners. So, there are natural sweeteners that are found in nature, like honey, that we know are beneficial, right? But it's an expensive product. So what do the commercial food processors do? They find cheaper alternatives. Cheaper alternatives like high fructose corn syrup or the 0-calorie sweeteners as being more healthy, right? Which in truth they're not. So 0-calorie sweeteners are things like aspartame. There are things like Splenda, Equal, Sweet and Low that are marketed for our diabetic patients. These actually pose more harm, right? So natural sugar in moderation is not that bad. In certain cases like maple syrup, they may have more nutrients than white processed sugar that we can use. But the more we chemically process these, the more unhealthy it becomes for us. And then third category are the trans fats and hydrogenated oils. Hydrogenated oils can be found in foods like margarine, Cool Whip, frosting, non-dairy coffee creamers. These are often foods where they're used as alternatives to dairy products. And then the other source of trans fats that we need to watch out for are in our deep fried foods. So coming from a South Asian background, this is our pakora and samosas, the aloo puri, dal puri, pani puri, the gulab jamun, the deep fried pitas. So and it's not just South Asian cuisine. I think every part of the world has their version of deep fried dough, deep fried stuffed dough. Especially with Ramadan coming up, I think about, for iftars, these are kind of our staple foods, right? You can't have an iftar meal without these deep fried foods. But we don't recognize how harmful they are to our health.
But I know at times, it can be challenging to maintain a healthy lifestyle due to various factors. But we should at least try to eat things that are nutritious and healing for our body. So if we wanted to shift more towards a sunnah-based diet, what would that look like and what foods should we incorporate?
The list of sunnah foods just go on and on and on. In general, there are probably benefits to any naturally occurring food items that has not been specifically forbidden. But a good start would be the foods that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has mentioned in the Quran, right? So dates, olives, honey, milk, pomegranates, figs, fish, wheat, barley. Now the caveat here is that these produce are grown and harvested in a way that are designed in nature, right? And they're not modified by our whims. Take, for example, milk. In our tradition, we're taught that raw milk is a cure for many illnesses because the cow grazes on different kinds of plants. Unfortunately, most of the milk that we find in our supermarkets are not from cows that have been grass-fed or pasture-raised. You have to specifically look for those labels, and those cost more. So the milk that comes from these grain-fed cows, or sometimes even more unnatural things, they're not going to have the same benefit as milk from a cow that's been grass-fed or that's been allowed to graze freely in a pasture. Another example are grain products. So when we take wheat and we make white flour, we're removing the bran and the germ layers. Now, the bran and the germ layers are where most of the fiber and vitamins and nutrients are. So when we make bread or flour or cake or pasta from white flour, it has very little nutritional value beyond the starch or the sugar, right? Mm-hmm. In the United States, a lot of the flour is marked enriched, right? So it's like after the processing, they try to throw in some extra nutrients and call it enriched, but it doesn't take it back to how it was originally, right? The way that Allah created it. So, in general, when we are eating foods as close to nature as Allah created them, there are benefits in that.
MashaAllah. We know a lot of the sunnah-based foods, and now we have a deeper understanding, and you have listed, some examples. So let's talk about some practical steps for a healthier lifestyle. So what are some simple and practical steps that we can take today to improve our health according to the Quran and Sunnah?
So one of the things I'm mindful in my own family is to make sure we're incorporating enough fruits and vegetables. Those are the things, make sure you wash them well, get all the pesticides out. Mm-hmm. But if, at least half of what you're eating on a daily basis are fruits and vegetables, it naturally curbs your appetite for other unhealthy foods. And then when we're purchasing packaged food items from the store, I try to read the ingredients and look for the simplest ingredient list. I'm lucky to have like a bakery down the street. When you get a loaf of bread from there, it's just 3 or 4 different ingredients, right? So again, it's being mindful, knowing what are the things to look out for, and just simpler, cleaner eating.
This has been such an insightful discussion, and inshallah, I, along with many of us here today, will start implementing a lot of these tips and suggestions you have laid out for us. Dr. Hoque, Jazakallah khair for sharing your knowledge with us today. Before we wrap up, what is one takeaway you would like for our audience to remember?
I think, referring back to our Quran and Sunnah, there's so much wisdom there. Growing up in a Western society, we kind of have become reliant on scientific evidence. But in most instances, the science is catching up to what is in our Quran and Sunnah. So we do need to examine our lifestyle, based on going back to the basics. And when science seems to suggest otherwise, I think we need to take a second look. What are the limitations in that science? If it contradicts our Quran and Sunnah.
SubhanAllah, that's such a beautiful reminder. And with that, we conclude our first episode of Preventive Health according to the Quran and Sunnah. Stay tuned for our next episode. If you found this video helpful or beneficial in any way, please share with others. Don't forget to follow our page and like for more discussions. Take care of yourself, and we'll see you next time, inshallah.